Welcome everybody. Welcome Tyler. Welcome Jeremy. This is going to be an awesome discussion here today. So Tyler is, and I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more, but he is the Chief Creative Officer at an NFT platform called Legend.art, or Legend really. It's at Legend.art, and that's LGND. Head over there and check it out while you're listening to us. They have a lot of incredible, like, it's a true art platform. It's not like, pixelated pictures. It's real art. And Tyler has an incredible background. Tyler, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us where what you've been doing at Legend. We'll talk about a lot, but like, where did you come from? And then we'll just kind of dive in from there.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, John. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me on the show. My name's Tyler. And so my background, I went into animation and I started working in Disney feature and then at Pixar. And then that was out in California and, Southern and Northern California, respectively. And then I moved out to New York and worked out there at Blue Sky, which was eventually bought by Disney. I think it was around 2017. So my background in animation was specializing in visual development and art direction and production design. And so after I left Blue Sky, went to Netflix, where I art directed on the Roald Dahl series, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Taika Waititi was the director. And art directing is really coming up with the visual look of everything that you see in a movie, or if you're doing something with a game or whatever the product is, it's coming up with everything that you see. And as you know, when you're building something in 3D or something on a computer, there's nothing for free, right? So everything needs to be designed so that you can guide the modelers and the riggers and the lighting artists and the effects artists, and basically everything going down the line needs direction there. And so that's what an art director and a production designer do in an animation studio and many game studios. And so that brought me to a point around, I guess it was 2020, a few years before this, and I'll just step back a little bit to tell you about Legend just a bit. I had a friend who had reached out about CryptoKitties when it first was launching. And he was like, "Are you seeing this? Like, have you ever heard of an NFT?" And I hadn't heard of NFTs at the time. This was probably around 2017. NBA Top Shots hadn't really become a thing yet, and there were just a few NFTs out there. And my friend wanted to start this platform, a new platform. And I was having a really hard time getting my head around it, like what it meant and what digital art as an NFT meant. But he told me the general ideas, and because of him, I had a pretty early introduction into NFTs. So what I told him at the time was, hey, I'm kind of like at this peak of my career and things are going so well, and I just am not ready to let this go, but I'd be happy to help and advise. And so we came up with a plan, and he went and started putting together funding and started putting together a team. And he'd come back every couple of months with some questions, and we talk. And then by about early 2020, he reached out and he said he had a lot of traction, and things were really moving along. And to be honest, I still had no idea what we were going to be doing together. I didn't really understand, I had no idea what was going to happen towards the end of 2020, right? So around July, I met the team that he had put together, which was just 2 people at the time, and decided to, come on board and run creative, and basically learned a lot really quickly about building an NFT platform. And really, this was so early that there was nothing to look at to compare. It wasn't like, oh, go look at this site. Like, I remember seeing OpenSea for the first time, and it looked just really weird and not easy to follow. And, they've done such a good job in recent years, the last 6 months, and just really streamlining the process of how that works in the marketplace. But at the time, there was nothing to look at. And I remember as we were building Legend, when Beeple did his first drop, like on October, it was, towards the end of October, I think it was October 30th. And I went and bought, one of his dollar NFTs. And then like 6 months later, it was worth, 300,000% more than what I bought it for. And just being kind of blown away by what happened and just the overall explosion. So that's kind of how things got started. And, the mantra at Legend is quality, and it's having NFTs that are backed. Their utility might not be something that unlocks a free thing or some type of an event, but sometimes it is that. Yeah, thanks, John. Sometimes there will be something like that, but the big thing that we pushed with Legend is that you're getting quality art from pioneers, from OGs in the space. And, that's what it's all about. And so these artists are top artists in the world and top artists that, we'll partner with, this Josh Davis show, PlayStation. We partnered with a gallery called Seasons LA and did, a physical live event, really beautiful gallery. And we had this enormous screen that we brought in, and Josh's work is really cool because it's almost like supplemental reality. And when you're walking by these giant screens, they're there to kind of react to your movements and what you're doing there on site. So it's really fun. And that's a little bit about what we do. Is we're really focused on bringing value to the NFTs themselves. Everything that we drop, we're 100% behind, and we're confident. And I think, as you mentioned earlier in the call, John, I think the NFT space has a ways to go before there's broader adoption. But these early times are so exciting. So this is just a little bit about Legend and just some of the exciting things that are going on there.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I was muted. So yeah, this is great, Tyler. I mean, it's awesome, and I love the story of you leaving behind like Netflix, right? I mean, that's a big, awesome employer to work for, and as a creative director there, and big salaries and all that stuff, and obviously center of the entertainment world. I mean, that's amazing. And obviously having come from Disney, and you've been right in the center of it, and then you're like, I'm going to go do NFTs, right? I mean, I bet a lot of people called you crazy, including probably your wife. I don't know, but what kind of reactions did you get? I just want to dig into that maybe just a little bit. Like, what did people say when you first were like, I'm going to go do this? Like, or did people think you were an idiot, or what was that reaction? Or were there some people that were like, you're doing the right thing, this is big?
That's a great question. I was very careful, and I still am, the way that I talk about everything, because there's a very strong current in the animation illustration world. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what NFTs are and the energy consumption. And I'm sure everybody's heard, the NFTs are destroying the universe by how much energy they consume. But there's some key fundamental facts about NFTs and the way that they work, the blockchain works, that people don't understand. And so I was very careful, actually. I didn't talk to a lot of people about it. In fact, I would say most of them don't really totally understand what that even meant. I told a couple really close friends what I was doing. And, I still keep a foot in that world. If people need me for speaking, or sometimes there's a film that I worked on like 5 years ago that's finally being released. But what I think is interesting is entertainment will probably be one of the first mainstream areas to come into NFTs, whether or not everybody likes it or not. I think it's just a matter of time before people realize, the cool things that they can do with that, and this ownership that they can pass along. There was something that was dropped by Peoplepleaser last week, and Mache Kusiara, and good friends of mine, really talented artists. Peoplepleaser dropped this new site where artists or creators who want to tell a story that could be turned into some type of a film or a product, at least in that sense, can do a drop, almost like a Kickstarter, to raise money. And I think this is just the beginning of a lot of things that are coming. But yeah, when I was first talking to people, I realized that nobody had any idea what I was talking about.
Sure.
And it was so early, they hadn't even heard of NFT.
Right.
So I really didn't talk about it very much. It was kind of just like, yeah, I'm going to do this new thing. And, people understood. And I think people know me for a few different things, but they also know that I'm pretty business minded. And at least being in the arts, it's not really common that people are thinking about what's happening next. And I think in the animation world and film world, like everybody, we get so consumed with our jobs that we really aren't thinking outside the box like that. But the thing that struck me about NFTs, and I still think NFTs are absolutely crazy. Like, I'm still blown away by them because I that's part of it is just, I just think it's absolutely nuts. Like everything, it's beautiful nuts. But the thing that struck me as such an interesting concept is, for many years, I've taught tutorials online and I've done workshops, and I've made all these different types of art education for people to learn how to draw and paint and improve their craft. But I did it in a way so that people don't have to pay Art Center tuition or CalArts tuition. It's like really cheap, actually, and very affordable. The only thing that was bad about this is that I saw people stealing my work and then they'd go sell it or resell it on digital marketplaces. So when I was hearing about NFTs, I liked the prospect that I could protect my work. And I'm not even talking about like my actual digital paintings, but that too, that's amazing. But there's something about the provenance that you can get from an NFT. And I've heard naysayers, argue this, but when it's actually your work and you're seeing someone, create a Telegram channel with 30,000 followers and they've blocked everyone out of it and they're giving your work away for free, and those people are paying for it, it really hits home. I mean, that's someone's livelihood, right? And so I think there's something really cool. That's what I'm most excited about for NFTs.
I want to show off Tower a little bit more. Like we say he's an artist. He really is an artist. He's not just jumping into this NFT game to, again, sell little pixelated whatever. This is real stuff. You can go to his website. It's just tycarterart.com. And can you buy stuff on here? Can you like order prints of this? Or do you not? Or is it just kind of a gallery?
This is just a gallery. There is a print shop, but it's currently closed at the moment.
Fair enough.
I got too lazy and got sick of sending people stuff. But when I go to conventions, I sell this stuff.
You sell this stuff, yeah. No, it's really cool. So I just came across this Jurassic Park stuff. You and I have talked about this before. By the way, little factoid: Tyler and I went to high school. Graduated same year and did a lot of things together. Actually, we did a lot of film and stuff related to our school. That was fun. So we go way back, but we both also connect on Jurassic Park. Tyler loves Jurassic Park, so do I. He's got some really just awesome art here, right? I mean, clever girl. So this is really cool stuff. I'm excited for the new Jurassic World to come out. I know you might not be as excited as I am, but you mentioned something a second ago where you said entertainment is probably going to come into this NFT space really hot and heavy, like really hard, even though right now they don't really know exactly what that looks like. But at least here at Seek, we're all about building community. And we've talked about this a lot, Tyler, right? And for me, I would jump at any opportunity to buy a Jurassic Park NFT and to jump into a community as an owner of some art in that community. And especially if there was good utility tied to some of that art and some of those things where I could interact with the cast somehow, or if I could, be an extra in an upcoming movie. There's so many things you could do with NFTs in terms of utility and community engagement. But I just have this vision in my mind where I just started building like communities, NFT communities for every single TV show. And I would be a part of so many of them. And I know a lot of people would. People really, really love TV shows, movies, those worlds, right, that incredible producers and creators have made. And I think that NFTs can provide a really exciting way to get involved with those communities and with that IP that, it just sits there on Netflix or sits there on whatever, and people watch it, and that's great. But there could be, I think, a lot more that is going to be here in the near future.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I feel like that whole community aspect of things like a TV series or a film, you know, like there's these cult followings behind some of these properties, and that's why they become franchises, because people really truly love it. Like we both have that love for Jurassic Park, and it's funny because I think people underestimate just how many people are out there in these communities and what they would do to be a part of it and find like-minded people, because we all like being around like-minded people. I mean, look at the politics just in the United States. People gravitate, and the algorithms gravitate towards telling you, you know, what people that think the same way as you are saying. But I think that's something really special about the community aspect of NFTs for sure. And I'm excited to see kind of where it goes. It's cool what you guys are doing at Seek and the way that you're approaching things, you know, thinking about the community, because that's huge. I mean, it really is, I think, bigger than the NFT aspect of everything. It's building that community.
Jeremy, which communities would you want to be a part of? What would be your like wish list of NFT communities?
Well,
most in the entertainment space, maybe, I don't know, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm actually not too big in the entertainment space, even though I do some media productions and things of that nature. My passions are in adventure sports, so I'd want to be part of a rock climbing community. I'd want to be part of a skydiving community.
So let me ask a little deeper. I want to dig in on that for a second, to just kind of go off of this. Would you rather be part of a rock climbing community or a skydiving community, or some specific skydivers community, some celebrity skydivers, like what's the guy's name on?
If Jeb Corliss had a community, I'm sure I wouldn't be the first because he's pretty popular, but I would be one of them, paying a lot of money for his membership NFT for sure. He's one of the world's most renowned wingsuit skydivers. And I think somebody said that there was less than 1,000 wingsuit skydivers. That's incredible. I mean, there's fewer wingsuit skydivers than NBA players. You know, it's just interesting how unique. You talk about non-fungible. Those dudes are non-fungible.
Yeah, for sure.
But I also would, to tell you the truth, I'm a complete nerd. So I would also love to be part of a theoretical physics community. And I actually think that some things like that probably have a greater use for NFTs than all of these existing communities, because all these existing communities have real world venues, real world activities, things of that nature. But there is literally nothing for people who are into cognitive sciences or theoretical physics.
Yeah, that's exactly where my mind was going, Jeremy. Like, where today, if you want to talk about some crazy whatever you're talking about here, where do you go to talk? I mean, obviously Reddit's a place where you can go to just to have forums, and probably some subreddits on things like that. But is there like a community today around that?
There's nothing. However, in the last 3 years, Instagram has completely organically, by no work at all from Meta, formerly Facebook. And what's happened is that there's been these accounts from mavens out there starting, whether it's cognitive sciences or whether it's theoretical physics or et cetera, and they have aggregated just interesting things. And they've taken one of the most vastly complicated topics in the universe, literally, and they've reduced it down to little memes or little posts on Instagram. Yeah. And it's just so fascinating because you're able to consume theoretical physics as you're swiping your feed in a matter of seconds. And it's just a whole new way of looking at extraordinarily complicated topics. And that's created community. It's created followers. It's created comments threads and things of that nature. And I guarantee you that there's been connections made because of that community where nothing exists.
This is on Instagram?
On Instagram, there's probably
what's a good one to follow? I'm maybe not as much a nerd as you are, Jeremy,
well,
but
they're all on there.
And I'd love to just like explore a little bit. So what's a good handle?
Yeah, I've been following them for so long. Here, I'll just look at it. I've got about 20 of them on here.
I'm sure. Yeah, pick one, and I just want to add it to my list. And anybody else that might care about crazy science.
Keep talking while I find.
You're good. Find it, Tyler. I want to ask you the same question. And it doesn't have to be entertainment, it could be whatever. Like who would be someone where you'd be like, wow, I would jump into that community immediately. And what would be your fanboy moment?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I really get into some of the sports teams that I follow. Like there's a couple La Liga teams right in Spain that I'm really into.
Cool.
And a couple in the Premier League in England. I think, man, that's a good question. I think I'd be a part of quite a few. What I love about those little communities and those little groups, if you can find them, is like you learn insights and like insider information about things that you didn't know that you couldn't get to before. And it just makes it so fun, right?
So I'm part of a group that's called on Facebook, it's called Perspective. It's all film composers. And Hans Zimmer is in there and he talks. And like it's like there's and I'm just saying one, but there's tons of like all the greats are in there. I don't think John Williams is in there. He's a little old for Facebook maybe, but I read stories in there of all these people that have had these like intimate experiences with movies and film composing and all this stuff and stories behind the scenes that really aren't being told. Like you could make videos, documentaries with the stories that you see and learn about it inside of these communities. And so I personally love the idea of NFTs being able to drive better organization and creation of decentralized communities, right? People being able to just connect around something and have a really cool way to not only show up and read what people are saying, but to buy in, right? And have an NFT that represents ownership and you're part of the group, right? I think that's really, really, really exciting. I don't know, Jeremy, did you find a thing?
There's several. Right. Physics_conversely is probably one of the most active ones. They have some hilarious. I love their Skeletor meme series, which they post, I think every week, which is it's hilarious. I don't know if any of you are He-Man fans from the 80s and 90s, but Skeletor was the nemesis to the protagonist, He-Man. And so it's physics_conversely.
There are more planes underwater than submarines in the sky. Skeletor will return soon with more facts. Yeah, I'll enjoy this. So I'll read that later. I want to jump back to Legend for a minute, Tyler, if you don't mind. So you had the unique opportunity of being, not a lot of people have built an NFT platform, right? And so I want to just poke on that for a minute, right? And there's probably 100 answers to this question, but what was harder than you expected? Like what turned out to be like really difficult? I think people that are sitting on this webinar, watching this webinar are maybe interested in building some of their own communities and things like that. So what, and it could be technical, it could be just content generation, could be, dealing with the artists and, negotiating contracts. I don't know what it is, but what was harder than you expected?
Yeah. I would say like all of the above. Anything that had to do with NFTs, you just don't know what you don't know, you don't know. And it just kept going on and on and on. And I still feel like there's new things that we're finding out. NFTs and blockchain really evolve so quickly and they're constantly evolving. So it's hard to, you kind of, at some point, you just have to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we're going to do. And this is how it's going to be. That's at least on the tech side. The other thing that I've found is it's very hard to find people who legitimately can do what they say they're going to do when it involves anything with blockchain. And then NFT smart contracts, it's a whole nother thing. Like there's a lot of people, whenever I hear somebody say they're an NFT expert, to me, it's a red flag. I feel like it hasn't been around long enough for anyone to be an expert. There's people with good experience, and there are people who I think are, really deep in the space and they understand, but people understand different things, right? Some people understand the culture of, NFT speculators and those collectors. Some people understand more of like the art side and like the collectors of traditional, groups that might buy something from a Basel or a Frieze. And then there's also this like full, like using NFTs to store money, store value. And then there's the broader market, which is like NBA Top Shots. And every group is like a different subset of why they're buying, what the purpose of their purchases are. And so I'd say like on the art side, the thing I've worked with artists my whole life. I think the thing that surprised me there is like, it's tricky when you get into it. It's tricky how you want to run your platform. Are you going to be something that can scale and grow really quickly? And if that's the case, then you need to automate everything. Are you going to build something that has a marketplace that's like your very own marketplace? What types of specifications are you going to put into that smart contract? And can that smart contract be something that most artists will want to use? Does it attribute the correct metadata to the artist when you transfer it, when you purchase it? If you took something across a bridge, does your bridge work? Does it retain those attributes in the metadata? And these are all things that you just don't know until you do it. And then you find out like, oh, blockchain was never meant to do what we're using it for. It's not meant to do that. And that's one reason it does use energy, but there's ways to start to make it more efficient, right? There's ways to do these things that we want to achieve and the things we want to create. But it took people kind of like, trying to smash two bricks together and create a sphere for a year, and then finally realizing, oh, there's easier ways to do this, and there's new technology. I mean, that's the thing that makes me super excited too about the space. There's new technology and new blockchains that are coming out that are taking more advantage of the technology and what it can be, where it can go. But
yeah,
I think the biggest thing that I've learned from like building a platform is your dev team. They need to be like really like in step with everything that you're doing. If you're thinking about launching a platform, make sure that your dev team has experience doing something with the blockchain code that you're planning to use. So if it's Ethereum, Solidity, right? If it's not, make sure that they know what they're doing. I'd say like being careful with outsourcing to foreign groups that you don't know or that you can't sit with like in an office. Because I think right now developers are kind of like the most valuable part of these platforms, right? And I think since the pandemic, a lot of people have been, these developers might take like 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. And maybe it's overconfidence, thinking that they can just do it, or maybe they're just trying to make some extra cash. And I don't fault them for that. But the problem that I see is sometimes they're not getting the work done that they say that they're going to do.
Yeah.
And then you miss deadlines for your clients and for your artists. And then, you're just like, what's going on? And, at least on the tech side and the artist side, there's those things. And the other thing I think that's a huge one is you need to know, if you're going to launch an NFT platform, you need to know who your audience is going to be. Like, who are they and why would they be purchasing these NFTs? That was the hardest thing for me when we were building out Legend, is because my thought was, let's come in here and build a platform for the top artists all around the world. But at the time, there were, top artists around the world that were recognized by, physical collectors, and then there were also like these new upcoming NFT artists that weren't really in the same realm. And right now there's a little bit of a mix that's starting to happen. You're starting to see some of these artists, do a drop with Sotheby's or with Christie's, or they'll have their own, show that's like independent. And these pop-ups are coming up all over the world, and you're seeing these different things. But I don't know, that's the part that is still like a mystery, is where is this going to go? And I think the art NFTs are going to stick around forever. I think they're going to be, this way for forever. It's finally a way for a digital asset to.
But along those lines, what do artists think about NFTs? Like these, you're working like top quality, top tier artists around the world. Like, and maybe a second part to that question, has that changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is what I saw that happened. So around 2020, toward the end of it, when people started hearing about NFTs and like what they actually were, there's a few different groups, right? There's illustrators, there's children's book illustrators, right? Those types of artists. There's concept artists and visual development artists. That's like where I came from, right? That includes film and video games and mobile games. And then you've got artists who are in the fine arts. And what happened a few years ago when Banksy became more popular and people like, somebody like a Tristan Eaton, these are like a D-Face, Shepard Fairey, these artists who are doing street art, which somebody not really knowing what to call them might call them a graffiti artist. With the advent of Banksy, these artists started becoming more and more popular, to the point where Banksy was doing, these auctions inside of a Christie's or a Sotheby's for millions and millions of dollars. And that was pre-NFT. So you started to see this shift from like a blue chip artist, like a Damien Hirst, right? That's an artist who's like the top artist. Like that is an artist, when he creates paintings, they're going to go for millions and millions of dollars. He's well established. He's done an amazing job building his career. You've got an artist like Takashi Murakami, who have created like these huge movements and followings behind them, right? And those artists are big and huge. But what's interesting about NFTs is when they first started coming out, the animation people, the concept artists and visual development artists, and the illustrators didn't jump into NFTs. And this is what's weird. That is surprising, because NFTs are digital assets, right? So you would think that the ones that are doing the digital paintings, who are the most well-versed in digital work, would be the first ones to come in. But there were some early kind of like, I would call them bendings of the truth and lies. You saw some of those early things where people came out and said, hey, I'm an artist and I'm an authority in this space, and I'm telling you that NFTs are bad because they're worse. They're more evil than Darth Vader. They're killing the planet. They're killing everything. And then, of course, what happens on Twitter, everything went viral, and suddenly it became like this war of back and forth. And the point that I'm getting at is, what's very interesting is, instead of like the digital painters from illustration, from children's books, from animation, instead of them being the first pioneers to jump in, what happened is it went to the next group, which were like the 3D generalists. And so if you look at the top NFT artists out there, who are incredible artists and, a lot of really good friends, these people who could do procedural renderings, they could do things all through code. These people who are using Turbo Squid models and bringing them in and composing a shot and lighting it. These 3D generalists were the ones who really were the first ones in. And it almost made the animation artists and the concept artists, and really a lot of them, almost spite them for what was going on and the whole environmental thing. I don't think it was ever about environmental issues. I actually think it was about who got in first and kind of being like wrong or right about it blowing up or taking off.
Yeah.
And I think when we see this correction, probably in this year with art NFTs, I think you're going to see a lot of the illustration people, concept artists are going to come back and say, I told you it was a total scam. But just to come back to your question, John, my thought just overall with all these different artists and how they all accepted it was, once it went from the 3D generalists, blue chip art is like really foofy doofy, right? It's a lot about how you market yourself. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That art is an opinion, it's an expression, it's a perspective. And John, you and I have talked about this. There's an amazing quote from Quentin Tarantino. He's being interviewed and they were asking him about why in his last film, one of the female characters had less lines than the male characters. And his answer was just, it was just part of the story. It wasn't like a conscious decision to try to make that female character not have lines. But he said the problem with a lot of people today is they really value ideology over art or the perspective, the vision. And an artist is like the most pure form of someone having a perspective of something. It's a painting. There's a story about Pablo Picasso. He was in his own show, walking through, and I believe it was Guernica. He was standing in front of that painting. There was a man standing there next to him, didn't know he was standing right in front of Picasso. And the man, puts his hand up to his face and he's like, my grandmother could do this painting. She could draw that. And Picasso, in response, was like, yeah, she probably could, but she didn't. And that's just it. When you're talking about anything creative, it's really a perspective of that creator, right? And that's I think the issue with some of this like ideology that kind of blows up and gets too big is people forget why they're doing, why do we have movies? A movie is a perspective. It's somebody's vision. There has to be a director at the head of that movie, like pushing for a vision and where it's going. So in my opinion, a lot of what's happening today is just it's this weird thing of ideology versus perspective and opinion. And
yeah, I mean, art is supposed to be the place where you can say whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
But then, if you say something, I mean, we saw this happen to Dr. Seuss, right? He had all kinds of people attack him for, and this is how he viewed the world, right? And again, I didn't know him, so I can't judge whether he's a good person or not. I have no idea. But the point is, it shouldn't matter. It's art. You should be allowed to, project what you think, and then if people like it, they like it. If they don't like it, they don't like it. It's art, and that's where art is. Art is in the eye of the beholder, right? You're gonna look at it. I'm an artist in a different way. I'm a musician, and so I write music, and I like what I write. I think other people like what I write too, and so that's great. But some people might not like it, and there's music that I can find that I don't like, and there's music I find that I like, and it's okay, right? Everybody has different tastes, and the world's a very big place. And so I really appreciate art for art's sake, and not having to, I mean, there's probably limits and things like that, right? As to, what I personally want to see. But again, if somebody's making art that I don't want to see, or maybe that is offensive to me in some way, well, then I don't need to go seek it out, right? I can let them put it in front of their audience that they want to do. And I think it's an important part of a free society, right? Is allowing free expression of art, and not everybody in the world enjoys those freedoms. And even here in the U.S. where we live, sometimes those expressions or those freedoms get they get attacked, right? And then you feel like, oh, I don't have permission to say whatever I want to say. And so that's a big, deep discussion we could go into for a long time, and we'll table that for another thing. I want to keep this really on NFTs, but really interesting points.
Hey, I have a question for you, Tyler. So you're from the art community, fabulous artist, love all your stuff. Please go out and check out some of his stuff. And eventually when he drops his NFTs, I implore everyone to go buy them. My question is not about now, because there's so many opinions about now that we could talk about. You could go out and research. I'm actually have a question for you: is when will either the next wave or the next wave happen? That's the question. So what I mean by that is someone could make the argument that a similar situation happened with the beginning of the internet, and the artists took over with web page development, and it was a creative concept. It required amazing artistic skills because there weren't the CMSs and the design tools and things of that nature. And you had to use, probably a Photoshop version 5 back in the mid 90s or something along those lines. And then you had to compress them into JPEGs and upload that with something called FTP. And that required a lot of technical work. And it took some passion by artists to create those websites, very similar to right now with NFTs. But today, to say that the World Wide Web and the internet is an artist's platform, you'd be laughed at. It's cloud computing, it's Netflix streaming media, it's voice over IP telephony, it's everything else. And then just maybe this tiny sliver of 1% of 1% are artists on Patreon.
Yeah.
So that's the next wave. So the question back to you, having gone through most of, if not part of, the artist initial phase of NFTs, when is the next or the next wave of NFTs going to take over? And what is that going to look like as it transforms into something useful to businesses?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jeremy. It's interesting you bring up the dot-com era. And, when you think about the bubble, when you look at the bubble, when you go back and look at the stock market, just focused on that in particular, it's funny because like in hindsight, everything's 2020 and you look at it and you're just like, wow, why didn't people sell up here at the top, right? But it happened over the course of a relatively long period of time. It wasn't just overnight, but it was a precipitous drop that happened for a year, 2 years, right? Until it was just like, oh yeah, this is a pretty big correction. And I think in the same sense, at least what I've been seeing, and I guess I should just add a big reason why I saw value in what was happening when I was working in these films and working on these awesome projects that I love. And I love animation, I love film so much. But the thing that I notice is like, if you keep your eye too focused on something, and I felt like I was starting to become a little complacent, because when you work in these studios for a long time, there's a system and you're just perfecting that system to the point where you're putting out, an amazing product, and that's awesome. And that needs to happen to make really good movies. But what was interesting to me is I kept always like looking around me at technology. And I learned a lesson when I was in college. One of my professors that a lot of people thought was foolish gave us some really good advice. And this was in animation. And he said, everyone should have a technical and a creative skill. And in animation, that's tricky because the technical side of things, the technical skills would be something like understanding how to light something or to render something or to model or to rig something. And so my first year in animation, I decided to try everything. And I'll bring this back to your questions, Jeremy, but there's a point with all this. I decided to try everything to see if I could naturally be good at one of these things. And I was naturally good at painting, and I was naturally good at doing the texturing, the materials on a model or something, because they were pretty close, like tied hand in hand. But what I ended up realizing is, I took a lot of time to learn how to model things. I took a lot of time to understand how to light. And because I did this, I understood the 3D pipeline better than most people. In fact, that kind of paved the way for me to be a director at my school and direct, a group of students that worked for free, and I worked for free for a couple of years to make a 6-minute film. So I guess the next big wave is, I don't know when that's going to be. And if I did tell you I knew, I'd be lying. But what I'm watching for are similar trends and parallels that I've seen at different times. Now, I didn't really pay that much attention to the dot-com bubble when it was happening. John and I were at high school making videos for our assemblies. So we didn't have our eyes on the ball there. But I do notice right now some really interesting things going on. One, you guys talked about the communities, right? And I think the only way for mainstream waves of NFTs to happen is it to become so easy to buy an NFT that my mom could do it, right, without blinking. And so I think that's going to happen when NFTs are attached to things that we're already using. And then people realize the utility of an NFT, and there's more creative solutions that brands or creators come up with. And, to your second question, I guess like you kind of mentioned like companies, right? And
well, when is it? Is it going to be, I'll give you, let's turn this into a multiple choice test. Do you think it's more likely that the NFT winter will be this winter or 2 or 3 years away from now?
It's a good question. The thing that is screwing up that NFT winter, in my opinion, is this invasion of Ukraine, because suddenly everybody's on like super hyper alert for everything. Everybody's watching the stock market like hawks. Everybody's waiting for the Fed to talk about rate increases. And then everybody's waiting for Coinbase to release this marketplace. I don't know how big of an influence. Coinbase is amazing, and we've worked with them, Legend, on some really cool projects. I just don't know how big of an influence Coinbase's marketplace will have. But in my opinion, there's two scenarios, Jeremy. We either see an NFT winter that starts within 3 months after the Coinbase marketplace is introduced. And that's because there will be an oversaturation of PFP projects. And I think it's going to drive speculation lower because there's just going to be so much out there, so much going on. And if it doesn't happen, then the other thing that could create an NFT winter is when President Biden comes out with whatever he's going to do for regulation of cryptocurrency. And both of those worry me a great deal, because I'm a very big believer actually in Bitcoin and Ethereum and a handful of other coins that have utilities. So that's what I would say. I think that's going to happen. I think those decisions and the combination of how those play out is going to, greatly affect a lot of things. The one thing that I hope, though, is the sovereignty of blockchain. I hope that it can remain intact. And I hope that we have people in Washington that are getting good advice from people who truly have this in mind.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, we're waiting for tomorrow. I mean, Biden's signing something tomorrow, an executive order on regulating and even establishing, a US backed currency for that. And so that's, I mean, if you want to buy on volatility, this is a good 24 hours.
It's down. The point I was trying to get to you, Tyler, was that on the march up to the dot-com bubble, what a lot of people forget, now you guys were of course in middle school, but for those of us who were in it, we all forget that there were 4 corrections leading up to the bubble. So there were 4 winters, the biggest of which was in 1998, and the market dropped by 1/3 in a matter of 3 months. 1/3. Wow. The market just crashed. That is technically the definition of a crash. But what happened after that? It went from the S&P went from 1,400 to over 5,000 in a matter of 2 years. And if you missed out on that winter, that dot-com winter, that internet winter, that web winter, you missed out on 400%. Now, of course, the people with hindsight are going to look back and say, yeah, but if I had sold at that NFT or at that web winter in 1998, and if I bought back in the recession of 2001 and 2002, I actually bought at the same price. So there's an interesting parallel between the dot-com bubble and Bitcoin. So in 2017, Bitcoin hit almost 20,000, and it ran up from 2,000, 3,000 all the way up to that, and then it crashed to about 3,000 in 2018, 2019. Right? What's Bitcoin trading at right now? It's trading at just under 40,000, and it traded as high as 68,000. Which number is bigger, 68,000 or 20,000? 60,000 is 3 times the unimaginable, stupendous bubble of 2017. So just recently, within the last 12 months, Bitcoin traded at an unfathomable amount, triple what people were saying was an unsustainable bubble in 2017. And so I think one of the lessons with all of this is that you never know, and don't bet against the longs, and certainly don't bet against the shorts.
Yeah, sure. It's a good point and a good parallel.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, anybody who's listening to this or watching this is interested in being involved in NFTs somehow, whether it's on the creation of NFTs themselves, platforms, investing in them, just buying them, interested in the space and the technology, maybe interested in what it does for their business. I know there's people attending right now that I'm working with that are with big companies, top 10 companies in the world type people. There's a lot to learn and a lot that we don't know. Right. And I agree. It's funny. Tyler, at the beginning, you said anybody that says they're an NFT expert is lying. And it's funny. I was like, I think I call myself that. And I went to my LinkedIn profile and it said NFT expert. And I changed my LinkedIn profile just now to now say I'm an NFT enthusiast. So, and I feel like, relatively speaking, I'm an expert, right? To the average Joe on the road. Yeah, I know what I'm talking about, at least a little bit, but I also know how much I don't know. And so I agree, right? But it's fun. It's really fun to be at the forefront of these technologies. Yes, Jeremy, it's a wild ride, many winters ahead, probably, and it's not going to go anywhere, right? I mean, crypto's things, but overall, the NFT technology it's going to. I really love what you said, Jeremy. I just have to say this, and then you can fill in. I love what you said about how the beginning of the internet was art. It was all because artists quickly grab onto new mediums because they can quickly be like, oh, this is cool. I can make something awesome. And then it becomes how you. I mean, now we're sitting on it, running our life, doing a webinar, teaching, education. Everything happens on it, and NFTs have the same type of potential.
There's actually science behind that art. Whenever we were working in the web in the late 90s, a little company called Adobe ruled the world. And I had never even used, let alone heard of Photoshop, but Photoshop and Adobe and their little viewer called Acrobat just dominated the internet. And we always wondered, why are they dominating the internet? And it's not Microsoft, it's not Cisco, it's not Dell Computer Corporation, which were the big stalwarts, and it's only tangentially was at IBM. And I think it's because of passion. I absolutely think it's one word. And I think that's what's driving NFTs is passion. And what drove the internet in 1995 through about mid 1997 was passion. Because for you to figure out how to go to internet, register a domain, figure out what TCP/IP was, you had to write your own DNS. You had to write your own something called MX records to do something called email. Then you had to fire up your own server by talking to somebody like HostGator or Prodigy or something along those lines. Then you had to figure out something called HTML. Then you had to figure out how to put that amazing JPEG image that you created from Photoshop into that page. And you put Tyler Carter with an amazing picture. And back then it was a gray background. It was so ugly. And so there's a gray background with Tyler's piece of art and it says Tyler Carter underneath of it. And that was black magic. But the only way that you do that, Tyler, is if you have passion.
Yeah.
Because there is no money to be made. There is no kudos. There is no cheering. There is no trophy. There's only passion. And that's why I believe artists lead the way.
Yeah. And referring back to a conversation we had with Nikki Sanders when she joined us from TaxBit on here, blockchain is the hardest way to do anything today. Right? You can do all of these NFT things. We can share art by painting it on a canvas and selling it, or buying it, in person, or doing a digital print. I mean, there's so many easier ways to do art selling and sharing, but there's just unique new things that NFTs and the blockchain representing ownership and transfer of ownership and things we've talked about in these webinar series that are worth exploring, that are worth the extra effort to make it happen. And so we have to finish up. Go ahead, Jeremy, one last comment, then we have to finish up. Yeah.
Oh, just one last comment. John's bringing up a really interesting point that we should do an entire webinar. I'd love to have Tyler comment on this as well. But you're absolutely right. Blockchain and NFTs, I believe, are partially being misused. They're either not being used and there's a missed opportunity, or they're being overused, which is maybe confidence and ego and things of that nature. NFTs and the blockchain have a very specific purpose. NFTs represent ownership. Blockchain represents trustless transactions. That's it. That's it. And anytime that you try to do more than what they actually are, you run into trouble. It's either difficult or it's inefficient. And it's just exactly like a title deed for a house. If you try to make that title deed the listing on Zillow, that title deed is just a piece of paper. Extending that piece of paper into a digital representation on the web is just unfathomable. You would never do that. It's a very, very inefficient way of doing that. Taking a photo of this title deed and putting it out on the web, you would never do that. Well, why would you do that with an NFT? And that's the same concept as NFTs are the concept of ownership, digital ownership, and blockchain is the concept of trustless transactions. And that's it. Don't do anything else beyond that, and you'll succeed.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and what I always tell artists, especially when we're onboarding them, if it's their first time dropping an NFT, is an NFT does two things. It has two purposes. It establishes the authenticity and it establishes the scarcity. So that artist can choose how many there will be, an edition of 100, an edition of 1, their choice. And it's coming from them, and we can prove it through the blockchain, like you said, with a trustless way of passing along information, which is self-sustaining and decentralized. So, those are the things that make me super excited, but I couldn't agree more. I think the technology is being really misused right now. And I think it's a matter of time to get it to the broader audiences where things will have to be a lot more streamlined. What came to mind when you actually mentioned that was the way that, like a TD Ameritrade works, right? You're purchasing these stocks from the stock market, but what are you actually buying when you're on there? And maybe that's the future. Maybe it's actually one more layer above the blockchain, and the company works to verify all that stuff on the blockchain. But when you do your transaction, maybe it's just on the surface. That's interesting.
Yeah, this is a great, we keep going on this, and I really appreciate Tyler. Tyler, thank you for joining. Jeremy, of course, always glad to have you on so we can discuss, and very fascinating. Look, this will be posted on ckxr.com/insights. So feel free to go there and rewatch it or share this with anybody else. And thank you guys. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
See ya.